Assistant U.S. Attorney and a Fox News contributor. So as court got back underway, Todd Blanche immediately moved for a mistrial to Judge Merchan, claiming that Stormy Daniels' testimony is prejudicial. Trump also taking to Truth Social to say the prosecution, which has no case, has gone too far. Mistrial. Are there grounds for a mistrial here, Andy?
Yeah, a lot of this testimony is salacious with no apparent purpose connecting it up to anything that's relevant to the trial. And I actually think the Trump team, they're not going to succeed in this. The judge is not going to grant them a mistrial, but they can use some of what Merchan has done, Judge Merchan, in order to bolster their motion. I regard this as unbelievable. The Trump lawyers vigorously objected not just to her testimony, but in particular to graphic descriptions of the salacious details of the sexual encounter. Merchan overruled those objections, then let the prosecutors elicit graphic details, and then sent the jury out of the room, apparently, to lecture the prosecutors for eliciting the testimony that the judge said they could elicit. It's remarkable.
Well, that content, may be salacious. It is salacious. But don't the jurors need to hear from Stormy Daniels to decide whether they believe her story, to decide whether they believe she actually had this sexual encounter with the former president? Or do you think that, too, is irrelevant?
The truth of her story is not relevant, Julian, one way or the other. The case is about, it's hard to remember this because of the way the case has been tried, but the charge here is that in 2017, Trump falsified his business records of a reimbursement to Michael Cohen. The fact that the reimbursement was for a non-disclosure deal, and whether Trump was prompted to pay the non-disclosure deal because the allegation by Stormy Daniels was true or false, makes no difference to how they booked these payments in 2017, which is what the case is supposed to be about.
Okay, so if I understand you, I've been trying to get this answer out of a couple of our legal analysts this morning. So if I'm following you correctly, Andy, it seems like the jurors do not need to make up their minds one way or the other about whether they believe Stormy Daniels and the former president ever had some kind of affair in order to determine his guilt or innocence, right? That's what you're saying,
Julian. I think the reason it's hard to get an answer to that question is there's what the law should require, and then there's the dynamic of the way the case is played out. So if we're just going to talk about what the charges are in the indictment, it's entirely correct that it doesn't matter whether the jury believes this happened or not, because it's really not relevant to why the records were falsified and whether they were falsified. However, once the judge lets this testimony in, then it's a live issue in the case. And I think it may profoundly affect Trump's decision whether to testify or not. If he could narrowly testify about the charges, that would be one thing. But now the jury's going to expect him to testify about Stormy Daniels' allegations and description about their encounter. And it's entirely possible that if he testified about it and they didn't believe him, they might convict him, even though her testimony isn't relevant to the charges.
So is that all part of the prosecution's strategy then? It's to put Trump in that box that you just described. It's also to paint him as a less than savory individual. I don't know the history of criminal proceedings, but it would seem to me that if you're a juror and you think that the person that you're deciding on is not a good person, you might be more inclined to convict.
Well, that's absolutely right, John, and it's of a piece with everything else. It's obviously more sensational than everything else that's happened in the trial. But let's again remember, the charges in the case are falsification of business records in 2017, which is usually a misdemeanor in New York. The way Bragg has presented the case, it's about the theft of the 2016 election by suppressing politically damaging information in violation of the federal campaign finance laws, which he has no authority to enforce. So the whole trial has been about inflating what the charges are actually about, which are pretty trivial in the scheme of things.
So do you think it was a mistake, Andy, for the judge to allow Stormy into the courtroom at all, or do you think he should have just done a better job of limiting her questioning, of limiting the testimony she was able to provide?
Jillian, whether it's a mistake depends on what your objective is. So if we want to indulge the fiction that what Judge Merchant is really concerned about here is due process and a trial that has integrity, then yes, it was a mistake to allow this testimony. But if the objective is to get Trump convicted so that Joe Biden can spend the months prior to the election calling him a convicted felon, and they're not terribly worried that down the road it gets reversed by the Court of Appeals, then it's not a mistake at all. It's exactly the plan.
But in terms of the appeal, I mean, we don't know if he's going to be convicted. If he is, obviously there will be an appeal. I mean, totally different case in terms of everything that happened, but maybe similar from this point, the Harvey Weinstein case. Court of Appeals overturned his conviction because the prosecution brought in witnesses who were not directly related to the case. If Stormy Daniels is not directly related to the falsification of business records, did they potentially have a reversible point on that?
Yeah, that's one of many points that they already have. But, John, the thing about Harvey Weinstein is, if I'm remembering right, his trial was about 3 years before his conviction got reversed. If Trump gets comfort from the Court of Appeals in like 2026, I don't think it's going to be cold comfort.
No, yeah, you're probably right about that. All right, Andy, thanks.